Thank you for listening and supporting the Daily Memphian. Sign up for one of our many free newsletters and breaking news alerts at dailymemphian.com/email to receive the latest local news stories impacting our community. Our weekly newsletters cover everything from sports to arts and culture, business, food, and more, along with daily updates of all the news we publish each day. Sign up or manage your email preferences at dailymemphian.com/email.
Welcome to the latest edition of the Daily Memphis Tigers podcast. I'm the basketball beat writer, Steven Johnson, joined by my guy, Frank Bonner. It's the eve of Memphis Madness, and Memphis football also has a big Thursday night game against Navy. So this is going to be a big week for Memphis sports in general. But before we get to that, don't forget to check out some of our other podcasts. Jennifer Biggs hosts Sound Bites, Eric Barnes hosts The Sidebar, and our guys Chris Harrington and Drew Hill record the Grizzlies podcast every single week. You can find all of these in the Tigers podcast anywhere you get your podcasts, including Spotify, Apple, and dailymemphian.com, of course. So like I said, Memphis Madness is going to kick off here in a couple hours, and I know that has the city buzzing. But before we get to that, we got to talk about football. It's a little bit more gloomier. The Tigers are now on a 3-game losing streak after a setback last week to Tulsa, so they have a chance to get back right tomorrow on Thursday against Navy. But before we get to that game, Frank, what just kind of happened against Temple last week? Tulsa, excuse me. Whoa. They've been losing a lot. They've been losing so much, man. I'm getting teams confused.
Well, the answer to that is not too much different than what happened against Temple. Turnovers, missed field goals, then just a couple of blunders by the defense, letting them score in 27 seconds in 3 plays at the end of the first half. Just they're doing things that they just weren't doing in those first 3 games. Especially with the turnovers, and they just aren't clicking enough to get over that hump of these close games.
So are you more of a glass half full, glass half empty type of guy? Because on one end, you could really make an argument that if not for key fumbles and maybe against Tulsa, all those missed field goals, like this team could easily be undefeated or with 1 loss. On the flip side, they also had a couple breaks go there were earlier, so this could also be a team that only has 1 win over Nicholls State. So where do you kind of lean on that?
I was a glass half full heading into the Tulsa game, but coming out of that, I'm looking at like a glass half empty now because, like you said, they could have won these games if it wasn't for a turnover here, turnover there. But if you keep having these turnovers or these missed field goals, then there comes a point where you just are the team that you are, even though everybody knows you could be playing better than what you are. If the losses keep adding up, then it is what it is.
I think for a lot of fans, Memphis football fans in particular, it's been a while since Memphis has really had they had a losing streak a couple years ago, I think, Fuente when he was still here, but that was a little bit different. This one feels like Memphis might just be an average or maybe a below average team. So I think this is kind of new. That's why everybody's kind of, I guess, worried. So what was the most worrisome thing from the game or the most worrisome trend that you kind of saw last week?
The offense not being able to finish drives. I mean, if you look at the stat sheet, the offense had a great game on the stat sheet. But we talk about the missed field goals. But in my opinion, part of the issue is that those field goals should have never been kicked because, there were drives where the offense was going down the field, going well, and then it stalls to where you have to kick a 48-yard field goal or a 53-yard field goal. In that first half, they had 12-play drives and walked away with no points. And so I think the offense in the red zone or even getting close to the red zone, stalling out is kind of an issue. I know everybody talks about the defense. The defense is a problem. But if your offense is in position to put points on the board, then they've got to do it.
Yeah. From what I watched, it seems like Memphis really needs those chunk plays to really score. I'm not sure they're at the point yet where they can really keep stringing together, 9, 10, and 11 play drives and end up with points, especially with some young players on offense, like a young quarterback. So I definitely think that's a good point. Is there anything they could do on defense schematically that could kind of help the defense turn around, you could think?
Yeah, I think you got to, a lot has been said about the three-man rush that they use a lot. I think you've got to, see if you can get to the quarterback with 4 instead of necessarily using 3 a bunch. I know a lot of offenses, they kind of take what the zone gives them, 8-play pass here, 10-play pass there, and they kind of chunk away at this defense because the quarterback, oftentimes has a lot of time to, throw the ball. I think, you maybe do a 4-man rush to see if you can put some of these quarterbacks in positions that will create turnovers. Another thing is the defense hasn't had turnovers this year. So if you get more pressure on the quarterback, maybe you get some more interceptions or something like that.
Yeah, definitely. And I know the obvious reply for some people would be like, that's going to lead some of those DBs in more one-on-one situations. But like you said, if teams are just taking what they want from the zone, So, I mean, you might as well decide to switch it up. So Navy, they were a team that started off rough. They got blown out by Marshall, didn't really play well against Air Force. But they look like they're kind of a different team in conference play. They almost beat SMU and Houston. They knocked off UCF. So even though Memphis is a double-digit favorite, I'm not sure if Memphis should be. What can we expect from Navy besides the triple option tomorrow?
Yeah, I think to go on your point, the most concerning thing if you're Memphis is if you look at your schedule, what are the most difficult teams left after Navy? You got Houston, UCF, and SMU. Mm-hmm. Well, this Navy team beat UCF. They lost by 8 to Houston, and it was a one-score game against SMU.
They were leading that game for a while, too.
And so this is a Navy team that's going to be physical with you. They're going to want to run the ball, and if you're that defense, you gotta hold your own and help that offense get going because this is going to be a physical game from this Navy team, and you're playing a Navy team that although they lost 3 of those 2 of those last 3, their confidence level is probably high because you played these teams really well, and so your confidence level of your Memphis probably taking a little hit. And so, that's kind of scary if you're a Memphis fan.
Yeah, man. I remember last year, the Navy game was kind of the turning point for the defense. They performed really well that game and then went on that kind of stretch where they looked like they were going to turn the corner, which I think is why there was so much confidence and excitement about the defense this year. So maybe this will be the game for them this season because the triple option is difficult, but it also is the only thing you really have to focus on. I don't think Navy's going to drop back and pass that much. So we'll see. But what can the offense really do? We keep seeing the turnovers. We obviously know that the coaching staff probably doesn't have the most confidence in the special teams. How are they going to be able to get points on Navy on Thursday?
I think you got to take some chances in your play calling. There have been times where the play calling has been, a bit conservative. I think you try to, like you said, get those chunk plays, try to do a play action pass, let Seth air it out and see what happens, especially if, and I hate to put it this way, but the turnovers are coming anyway. Even when you do some conservative play calling, if the turnovers are still coming, then try to gamble or whatever to see if, that opens some things up to help this offense because those long methodical drives don't always end in points. So you got to try to get some slippage from this Navy defense to try to catch them on their heels a little bit.
Big picture wise, we know Memphis is about to get into relatively the meat of its schedule. Like after Navy, it's UCF, SMU, East Carolina, then Houston. So I guess going from the big picture, how much would a loss really set them back? I mean, obviously it seems like the conference championship seems out of the picture, but if they lose this game, do they have to be worried about making the bowl game now?
I think so. Because when I was looking at the schedule, the 3, you're trying to get the 6 wins in terms of a bowl game. Mm-hmm. Your best option to get the 6 wins is Navy, East Carolina, and Tulane. Well, if you lose the Navy, then you have to beat Houston, UCF, or SMU. And it's not to say that Memphis can't, right? Because the Memphis team we saw against Mississippi State
can beat anybody. Yeah.
Can beat anybody. Although I think this SMU team is really good. Mm-hmm. But, you can beat UCF, Houston, and compete against SMU. But if we don't see that Memphis team ever again and you lose to Navy, I'm not sure if they make it to 6 wins.
Man, it's been tough, and I think Ryan Silverfield is starting to feel the pressure because the expectations that have just risen so much over this last decade or so. So I think he's going to be at the point where, man, it's going to feel like, especially if they lose tomorrow, it's going to feel like every week is the most important game of his tenure because there's a lot of pressure, not just in the right now, but also long term. People question, is he going to be the right guy to keep Memphis at this level and get them into the Power Five? So, it's a pressure-packed situation. What do you think is going to be the outcome? What do you think the outcome is going to be on Thursday?
Oh, man.
Let me phrase it like this. Temple is a 10.5-point underdog. Do you think Navy will cover?
Navy will cover the 10.5 points. I think if Memphis wins this game, it won't be by more than a touchdown. And so I think Navy will cover. To your point about Silverfield, I think the year that he had last year, in your first year, COVID year, the year that he had last year, I think that alone buys him 3 full seasons before you start questioning his job. I think he's earned himself that. And so I think after next year, you look at his full body of work and you make your decision on whether you think he's the right guy or not. But I think last year earned him 3 full years.
I agree. And it's just like, that's just the nature of social media. Just like with every loss, fire him, let's get Hugh Freeze or something like that. I think Ryan, especially with the recruiting, I know some of the transfers haven't really popped just yet, but with the recruiting he did last year, I think they'll have another pretty good class again this year. You definitely want to give him time to get those guys in the program, in the system. But I wouldn't be surprised if after this season, if things continue on this path, he might have to make a change at coordinator, and it's going to start on defense as much as I like Coach Mack. But the Tigers weren't really good last year. Looks like they kind of got worse this year. So you just can't keep having that if you want this team to compete year in and year out for an AAC championship.
Yeah, and those are difficult decisions that, a new head coach, has to make sometimes. And if you want to make a decision in your coaching staff and switch things up. And so I do think if this year continues on this trend for Silverfield, he's going to have a lot of late nights up thinking about how he's going to move forward, whether it's with a coordinator or whatever the case may be. Because I do think next year will be a pivotal year for him in terms of, his job security being on the hot seat or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So on a much lighter note, tonight is also Memphis Madness, which, is basically a big pet rally, kind of signify the start of the season. So the FedEx Forum should be packed. There are a bunch of 5-star recruits coming in. This will actually be, Frank, I know I grew up here and whatnot. This will actually be my first time going. I don't know if you got a ticket or anything, but this will be, they had to do virtual last year. So this will be live, with the team they have. I think there's going to be plenty of excitement, and I'm honestly ready to see how deep the FedEx Forum crowd is about to be.
Yeah, I think this is a long time coming for Memphis in terms of when this recruitment excitement started, and now that it's here. I mean, I'm curious to see what this Memphis basketball atmosphere is like. I went to undergrad. I went to Indiana University, big basketball school, and so I understand the excitement around a basketball program, and so I'm curious to see what this Memphis fan base, how they treat this team this year.
Oh, I think they're going to be. I mean, if they, with the talent they have, of course they perform to their expectations, man. It'll be real festive around the city. Just going back to those great teams with Derrick Rose and some of those other teams. When the basketball team is doing well, you can literally feel it in the city, man. So I think that's the biggest thing I'm looking forward to. And of course, having watched these guys in 2 open practices now, they're big, they're long. They're a team that could kind of really put on a show with the type of skill set they have. So I'm really curious to see what performers they have. Every year they bring out a number of performers. Normally they're big time rappers and things like that. I've heard some rumors, but people get in trouble for that. So I'm not even going to go on the mic and speculate. We'll find out in a couple hours. But on a different note besides that, the AAC released some of its preseason predictions, all conference team tweeted out earlier. Surprisingly, Houston. Well, I shouldn't say a surprise. I think there was an expectation Memphis was going to be voted the favorites in the AAC by the coaches, but it was actually Houston. We know Houston went to the Final Four last year, so I gotta imagine there's going to be some bulletin board material for the Tigers this season too.
Yeah, definitely. I think when you have this amount of talent on your roster, this amount of hype around your team, and you see that you're number 2, I think when that game comes to the schedule, they're going to try to show, why they should have been voted number 1 or what have you. But like you said, I mean, Houston's coming off an incredible year. You can't really knock the coaches for giving Houston the nod. It's not like they were ranked number 1 by a whole bunch of votes. I mean, Memphis was right there as a close second. So you can't really knock putting Houston in the preseason favorite.
Yeah, I agree. It's just kind of, there are 2 things that are very interesting about it. Is one, Memphis has the most guys on the all conference. They got 2 guys on first team. Jalen Duren was voted the preseason rookie of the year, and Landers Nolley was first team along with him. Imani Bates and DeAndre Williams were voted preseason all second team. So they're basically saying Memphis has the most talent, but depending on, Penny's history, depending on how you look at it, you could either take that as a huge compliment to Kelvin Sampson, the coach of Houston, or kind of a slight dig at Penny, saying that you'll have 4 all-conference players, but you probably still won't win. And then Sampson, I think, added to that, saying he was a little surprised that they were voted number 1 because they did lose a lot. And, of course, they've been active in the transfer portal just like Memphis. But I think Memphis addressed some of his needs a little more clearly than Houston did. So, he was on – and some of his coach speak, but he was at AAC Media Days, and he was like, hey, man, we lost a lot of players from last year, a lot of key guys. And, I was a little – he said straight up, I was a little surprised we were voted number 1.
Yeah, and I think, part of that is people want to see Memphis prove that they are the team that everybody expects them to be. And so I think some people don't want to necessarily give Memphis that nod yet until they're able to prove it on the court. And I don't think there's necessarily anything wrong with that. I mean, preseason rankings are or whatever they are anyway. But yeah, I mean, I think people still want to see Memphis prove it. Even if you think they will be able to prove it, you still want to see it first. Yeah,
and I think that's fair. I think Penny has kind of gotten a little bit of a unfair rap just because they haven't made the NCAA tournament. But in terms of, he's won 20 games every year. They have been one of the best defensive teams in the country year in and year out. And that's coaching, you know what I'm saying? That's just not, that's not just effort. That's schemes. That's what they're coaching. That's what they're coaching up to be. So obviously it's a big year, but it'll be interesting to see. Memphis has its media day portions tomorrow after Memphis Madness. So it'll be interesting to see how Penny and the staff kind of respond to that. Most of the time they don't really care, but I think sometimes that stuff can matter. Like I said, it could be easily perceived as a small dig at Penny. Like, we think you guys are going to be really good this year, but like you said earlier, you have to prove it to us. And, it's a proven season for Memphis,
But
go ahead.
If you're Penny Hardaway, though, you use that as fuel for your team. And so I don't think that Memphis is in a bad spot being number 2 and not number 1, because then if you embrace that dig, right? Mm-hmm. You tell your players that we've got a lot we've still got stuff to prove. You're talented, whatever. And so I think if you embrace that the right way, I think that can make your team better, being ranked number 2 instead of number 1.
Absolutely. I think in most cases I would rather be the hunter as opposed to the hunted. So I think, like you said, there'll be more motivational fuel. Those guys have already been kind of preaching, we have to buy in. We have all the talent, but that doesn't mean we're going to win games. And now they have this. So it's one thing to hear from the coaches, but now they can, kind of bring this up. Hey, these guys in the conference say y'all the most talented, but they still don't think y'all going to win. So now what does that say to y'all? We have to buy in order to reach that. So I think in the long run, it'll actually be a good thing for Memphis, whether they say they care about it or not. But so we got Memphis Madness tonight, Memphis basketball at their AAC Media Days tomorrow, and, of course, Memphis football against Navy. So it's going to be a big week for Memphis sports. So thank y'all once again for tuning in. Once again, I'm the basketball beat writer, Steven Johnson, joined by my guy, Frank Bonner, who covers the Memphis Tigers football team. And we'll see you guys next week.
In-depth journalism in the Memphis community. The Daily Memphian is of Memphis, not just in Memphis, and seeks to tell the stories of this city. TheDailyMemphian.com. Truth in place.